I want you to think with me for a moment about David in the cave of Adullam. So if you know anything about the life of David and how he arose like a rocket, but then got cast to the bottom of the pile and then was chased for his life, as David is running for his life, he is sent, or he seeks out the cave of Adullam to hide. And so he goes there, and he's probably, since David is an emotional character, he's got to be facing some negativity. He's got to be facing some crisis moments. We know that he gets to the cave of Adullam like with 5 loaves of bread. Like, I can't imagine the loaves were great big loaves. They're probably like they are today, like, the size that a family would sit down to and devour in one meal. And so David had to leave his friends behind. He had to leave his job behind. He had to leave his family behind. He had to run for his life. And while he was doing so, he was alone and went to the cave of Adullam. Now, what all kind of things do you think David was dealing with? If you don't think that depression and negativity were heavy upon him, and even demonic attack, you're not really thinking about a scenario here. You have to remember also that David had killed Goliath. Like, he had conquered some mighty things in his life. Now, he did it for the Lord and with the Lord's power. But that was his history. Like, he had been successful as a giant killer. And that wasn't a fluke, because as he was put in charge of a military unit, they were highly successful, and David was rising in stardom like a legend. We like our military heroes, and it was no different back then. And people were finding out that David wasn't just lucky. He wasn't just a mouth. David could back up things, and he was also a leader, and people didn't mind following him into battle, and he was very, very successful. And this made Saul jealous. But on top of this, David had been anointed the king by God. And things were upside down. Things were not the way they were supposed to be. When God declares something, when God promises something, it's usually amazing, and not usually. It is when God promises something, it's amazing and abundant. The promises he makes to us are life-giving. They are hope-inspiring. Most of the time we're humbled by how amazing of a thing that God has promised us. And so God had promised David, he's like, David, you're going to be king. But everything was upside down. The man who was supposed to be at the pinnacle of life was at the bottom end of life, and everything was out of whack. You have to understand that he ran from Saul so quickly that he didn't even take military gear with him. He didn't have time to go back and get a bow and arrows and a sword and a spear. Now, he did grab Goliath's sword on the way by Ahimelech, but he left in a hurry, didn't even have food. He had to get a little bit of food from Ahimelech, and he just went. And so David would have had, a little bit of protection, like he wasn't going to get rained on, and maybe nobody could beat him up or steal from him if he was sleeping deep in a cave. And maybe if the cave had 2 exits, maybe if somebody came in the front, maybe he could escape. But David only had the bare essentials when he's at the cave of Adullam. Now, the more that someone is promised, and the more talented that a person is, and the more that a person has served the Lord, if things are upside down and horrible and awful, the more internal pain that person is going to suffer and go through. And so you can imagine the kind of suffering that David would have gone through. But here's what's beautiful about this. If you are put under that intense of pain, you begin to look deeper and deeper for treasure. Now think about this. Everybody else in life, there are people in life that don't deserve what they have, and God lets them have more than they deserve. Evil people even. He lets them have more than they deserve. It might be because of the future. There are others that their life is good and bad, but it's just kind of okay. There's other people that have easy lives. It's just, there have not much problems. But there are some where things are really supposed to be aligned and aligned well, where they are forced to dig deep because of the intense amount of pain that is heaped upon them. But let's think about this. Who is it that gains the greatest treasures of life? It's those that dig the deepest. Those who dig the deepest into their spiritual walk, who dig the deepest into the Bible, who dig the deepest into communing with the Lord, will end up with the most significant treasures. So as pain upon pain is heaped upon your life, give utter and absolute praise to God Almighty.